Hare Krishna, welcome everyone.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Dandavat
Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam, Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Pranam, Jai Srila Prabhupada. Thank you everyone for joining. Sorry for the few minutes delay. I was at the temple and then I drove here and got a little late. Oh. Yashoda Vatsala Prabhu, can you share the YouTube, the Vohe Vaishnav Thakur?
Yeah, Prabhuji. Oh,
Thank
I'm sorry. I thought I'm already doing that.
No.
I'm sorry for that.
And when you share it, then there's a little box down. You have to click on that, and it says share the sound also. You'll
Okay.
notice when you
Sure.
press the share. Yeah.
Sure, Prabhuji.
Okay, I got it actually. No problem.
एकाकिया माला नाही पयबला हरिनाम संकीर्तने
एकाकिया माला नाही पयबला हरिनाम संकीर्तने हरिनाम संकीर्तने তুমি কৃপা করে সদাবিন্দু দিয়া তুমি কৃপা করে সদাবিন্দু দিয়া দেহ কৃষ্ণ নাম দানে হরে কৃষ্ণ 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 হরে হরে
Hare Krishna. Okay, so let us begin now. We'll begin with the prayers to the spiritual master. Om Jnanam Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshururmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadahmayam Tadadi swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitangsha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Adaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I thought that just as a very kind of quick recap, it would be nice if we just read through the verses of the Isopanisad. There's only 18 of them, up to the point where we're starting today, which is text 12, I believe. And in this way, we will get up to speed on how these verses are progressing, because we're starting a sort of a new section today. So I'll just read here. Invocation. The personality of Godhead is perfect and complete. And because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself. Because he is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance. Everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. One may aspire to live for hundreds of years if he continuously goes on working in that way, for that sort of work will not bind him to the law of karma. There is no alternative for this way for man. The killer of the soul, whoever he may be, must enter into the planets known as the worlds of the faithless, full of darkness and ignorance. Although fixed in his abode, the personality of God is swifter than the mind and can overcome all others running. The powerful demigods cannot approach him, although in one place he controls those who supply the air and rain. He surpasses all in excellence. The Supreme Lord walks and does not walk. He is far away, but he is very near as well. He is within everything, and yet he is outside of everything. He who systematically sees everything in relation to the Supreme Lord, who sees all living entities as his parts and parcels, and who sees the Supreme Lord within everything, never hates anything or any being. One who always sees all living entities as spiritual sparks, in quality one with the Lord, becomes a true knower of things. What then can be illusion or anxiety for him? Such a person must factually know the greatest of all, the personality of Godhead, who is unembodied, omniscient, beyond reproach, without veins, pure and uncontaminated. The self-sufficient philosopher who has been fulfilling everyone's desire since time immemorial. Those who engage in the culture of nescient activities shall enter into the darkest region of ignorance. Worse still are those engaged in the culture of so-called knowledge. The wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge, and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nescience. Only one who can learn the process of nescience and that of transcendental knowledge side by side, transcend the influence of repeated birth and death, and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. And so now, the overview of mantras 12 to 14, the next section that we are starting. Mantra 12 explains that materialistic religion is detrimental and transcendental religion without bhakti is more dangerous. So similar theme, continuing on with that. Mantra 13 defines the difference between the relative and the absolute. And Mantra 14 directs us to understand both relative and absolute to attain perfection. Kind of, you could say, it mirrors the previous verses and their sections. Text 11 was saying the same thing, learning nescience and truth side by side. And text 14 also is saying the same thing, but in a different way. So mantra 12, those who are engaged in the worship of demigods enter into the darkest region of ignorance. And still more do the worshippers of the impersonal Brahman, impersonal absolute. So those who worship the demigods, that's materialistic religion, enter into the darkest region of ignorance. And still more are those who worship this Nirguna Brahman, this impersonal absolute. Mantra 13, it is said that one result is obtained by worshipping the supreme cause of all causes, and that another result is obtained by worshipping what is not supreme. All this is heard from the undisturbed authorities who clearly explained it. So, similar theme, further deepening this point. Those who worship the demigods, they get one result. But those who worship the cause of all causes, they get another result. And finally, mantra 14, one should know perfectly the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and his transcendental name, form, qualities, and pastimes, as well as the temporary material creation with its temporary demigods, men and animals. When one knows these, he surpasses death and the ephemeral cosmic manifestation with it. And in the eternal kingdom of God, he enjoys his eternal life of bliss and knowledge. Right? So, though we only want to worship the cause of all causes, we should still understand the temporary material creation. And this is actually so characteristic of the Upanishads, particularly the Isopanisad, that they're always speaking in apparent contradictions. They say, only worship the Lord, don't worship the demigods. Yet, know the Supreme Lord as well as the material creation and the demigods. Understand both things. Because our philosophy is achintya bheda bheda, right? Our philosophy inherently, intrinsically, is inconceivable oneness and difference. It's we don't follow a philosophy of either or, but we follow a philosophy of and both. Okay, back to our slides. So mantra 12 describes how worshippers of Asambhuti go to the darkest region of ignorance. But those who worship the impersonal absolute truth sambhuti, go to a worse place. Mantra 13 details the varying results of worshipping for worshippers of relative truth. This material world, asambhuti, compared to the worshippers of the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, sambhuti. And Mantra 14 says that we should know both side by side in order to enter the spiritual kingdom. You see? So someone who is not in the tradition, in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, in the understanding it through the acharyas, will think that these verses make no sense. Because the same word, sambhuti, is in mantra 12. And it's saying that if you worship sambhuti, you go to a worse place than worshiping the demigods. Then mantra 13 uses the same word asambhuti and says that the result for the asambhuti is not so good. But the result of worshipping those who are sambhuti is so wonderful. But the words asambhuti and the words sambhuti are referring to different things in these different verses, particularly the word sambhuti. It's referring to different aspects of the absolute truth. And Isopanisad also, as we can see, offers such a strong rebuttal to impersonalism. And then mantra 14 concludes with saying that we should understand both of these side by side. So here's mantra 12 again. Adham tama pravishanti ye sambhutim upasate tato bhuya ivate tamo yau sambhutyam rata. Those who are engaged in the worship of demigods enter into the darkest region of ignorance, and still more do the worshippers of the impersonal absolute. So as I mentioned, this section is like a mirror of the previous section. But rather than speaking about knowledge, it's now speaking about the absolute truth. So text 9, so we're 9, 10, 11, right? 12, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So 9 and 12 are being compared here, the first of the three sets. 9 was those who engage in the culture of nescient activities shall enter into the darkest region of ignorance. Worse still are those engaged in the culture of so-called knowledge. So those who are engaged in material studies, science, engineering, they are going to enter in material thoughts. But worse still are those who are engaged in mundane spirituality. And that's worse. In the same way, those who engage in the worship of the demigods for material things, just for the material matter world, they're in ignorance. But worse still are those who approach spirituality, who worship the spiritual, but in an impersonal way. So let's look at these two things, the worship of the demigods and the worship of the impersonal absolute truth. So this verse was also translated by Madhvacharya, and the way he translates this verse, same Sanskrit, but he translates this verse in a very different way. Those who worship the Lord as only the destroyer of misery and ignorance, not accepting the Lord as the creator of good qualities, enter into deep darkness. Those who worship the Lord as only the creator of bliss and knowledge, not accepting the Lord as destroyer of bad qualities, enter even deeper darkness. So amazing. How is this what he's describing? The worshippers of the demigods, Krishna says in the Gita, that they're only worshiping him, but as the worshippers of the demigods are worshiping Krishna, but in a wrong way. So how are they worshiping him? They're worshiping him as only the creator, only the destroyer of misery and ignorance, meaning the demigods, by giving us material happiness, remove our misery and ignorance, but they miss out the spiritual world. So when we worship the demigods, we're worshiping Krishna's energy, his power, because his power is invested in the demigods. We're worshiping him. Whenever we respect someone powerful, we're actually appreciating the Lord because that power is coming from the Lord. But we're forgetting his aspect of the Lord in his transcendental realm. We're just appreciating his material qualities because the demigods exhibit the material qualities. And when we are worshiping the impersonal Brahman, then we are worshiping the spirit, but forgetting that in Krishna there's variety. And Krishna is also the creator of this material world. This world is not mithya. It is the Lord's energy. It is his creation. So we're accepting the Lord, but without his variegated energies as the destroyer of the bad qualities, as as the person who has many different energies that are working. We're only looking at his aspect of bliss and knowledge, which is the impersonal Brahman aspect. Vedanta Deshika in the Ramanuja Sampradaya translates this verse in a different way. Those pursuing liberation who engage solely in meditating on destroying the unfavorable elements to attainment of the Lord enter into deep ignorance, but those who engage solely in meditation for attaining the Lord enter into even deeper ignorance. So same idea, that Krishna destroys the unfavorable elements, but forgetting his transcendental aspect. And then the second part almost seems like if someone is only interested in their own attainment, in merging into the absolute truth, and for their own nirvana, their own attainment, but they have no interest in recognizing the material creation and expressing compassion for others, trying to help them spiritually, they go into even deeper ignorance. Why? Because that impersonal liberation, the Brahman liberation, we lose our individuality for some time. We are in like a state of a vacuum, simply floating in Brahman. And then again, we have to fall down to this material world. And so therefore, again, we enter into this mode of ignorance. Baladev Vidya Bhushan. So he's our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. So we looked at the Madhva Sampradaya, Ramanuja Sampradaya, Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, Baladev Vidya Bhushan. He says, those who worship the unmanifest Prakriti attain the ignorance of the material realm. And those who worship the manifest Brahman attain even deeper ignorance. This is very interesting. So Baladev Vidya Bhushan describes this as the unmanifest Prakriti, meaning more like an pantheism, those who worship simply nature, Krishna's material energy, which is basically the same as demigod worship. Srila Prabhupada puts it that way. They enter the material realm. But those who worship only Brahman, they enter even darker ignorance. Now, Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains this further. Those who worship the impersonal feature of God, Asambhuti, enter darkness, and those who are absorbed in matter, Sambhuti, enter greater darkness. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur flips this around, and he actually translates this as those who worship the impersonal feature enter darkness, but those who worship matter enter even greater darkness. So now we may question, well, which one is correct? Because Bhaktivinoda Thakur is giving an opposite explanation. Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary: when an object loses its qualities, it becomes a sambhuti. A sambhuti occurs by destruction or merging. Those who cultivate the impersonal aspect of the Lord without qualities, nirvishesha, are worshippers of the asambhuti. and they enter darkness. When the jiva's consciousness of his existence disappears, nothing can be understood. In that state, there is no light at all. Thus, it is called darkness. Those who are engaged in sambhuti, or material existence, or even further from realizing Atma, soul and God. Those who are engaged in sambhuti, or material existence, are even further from realizing Atma, soul and God, and enter worse darkness. Oh my gosh, this is very technical here.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, is it possible to go to Madhvacharya's translation?
Sure.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Were you able to note it down? Okay. So, now, how do we make sense of these different interpretations of the different acharyas? From mantra 12, we learn that those who worship demigods or the impersonal absolute are covered by ignorance. The personal form of the absolute truth, Bhagavan, the Supreme Lord himself, is fully independent and is the source of both the demigods and the impersonal spiritual effulgence. Knowing him to be the highest realization of the absolute truth, devotees render loving service unto him. People worship the demigods for some material sense gratification or heavenly pleasures, but such happiness is only temporary and binds the soul to the cycle of birth and death. Worshippers of the impersonal aspect of the Lord as the absolute truth are also practicing another form of atheism as they deny the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Those pseudo-religionists fall into the darkest regions of ignorance as they mislead their followers from eternal spiritual life. So the essence of all these interpretations of the acharyas is given right here, right? The essence is that when we worship the personal form of the Lord, then we become fully cognizant of who he is and loving devotional service to the Lord. But other forms of worship to the demigods, worship to the impersonal Brahman, these forms of worship improve one's material position, or they give one relief from material darkness, but they mislead the followers because they take the followers on an even longer journey. They're worshiping, but if you realize the impersonal Brahman, if you get nirguna, if you get sayujya mukti, then your actual mukti, which is attaining Krishna's abode, getting liberation, going to the spiritual world, gets delayed because you have to go to the impersonal Brahman, merge into there, stay in that merged state for who knows how long, and then fall down again to this material world. Because since we are pleasure-seeking beings, one of the characteristics of the Atma is Ananda. We are always searching for pleasure. And in the impersonal aspect, there's no pleasure there. So eventually, Prabhupada says, the soul becomes bored and has to fall down back into this material world. So these pseudo-religionists are actually doing a great disservice to society. Because when people finally come to spiritual life, they're giving them something that is false gold, that is not real gold, but false gold. The people who are worshiping the demigods, they're getting, copper, and they know that they're getting copper. But people who go and worship the impersonal Brahman under these different yogis and gurus, they are getting something that appears spiritual, but it's false. Now, we saw that how the different acharyas have slightly different understandings, translations of this verse. And we will find this quite often in Shastra, that different acharyas will say different things at different times. And sometimes they will even contradict themselves, apparently contradict themselves. So when we find such situations where the acharyas for the same verse are saying opposite things, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur was saying, then how do we resolve it? How do we say, oh, is one wrong? They're all liberated souls. No, we resolve it by understanding that we may not be understanding the full picture, right? And number one, we may not understand the full picture. And number two, that they are appreciating different aspects of the same absolute truth in different ways, but they're both correct. Like, for example, in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's translation, he seems to flip it around, and he's saying those who worship the impersonal feature, they go to darkness, but those who worship matter, they go even lower. And the previous acharyas, the other acharyas, were saying the opposite. But what Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying could also mean that he's contrasting Mayavad philosophy with Buddhist philosophy. And our philosophy, he's not actually speaking about demigod worship, but he's talking about people who want to attain nirvana, which is a state essentially of emptiness, self-annihilation, in some ways only appreciating matter. Because Buddhists, they say that there's no soul, there's no spirit. This whole world is matter, and nirvana means emptiness. That nirvana means nothingness, basically emptiness, which means you realize that everything is just empty. All of this is false. So the way I read it actually is that Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying, impersonal, he's not talking about demigod worship, but he would also agree with the other acharyas that demigod worship is still better than Mayavad philosophy and Mayavad practice. But then here he's speaking about entering about Buddhism, which is even worse. It's because here he says this: when the jiva's consciousness of his existence disappears, nothing can be understood. Right? So previous one was worshiping the Lord but without qualities. That was asambhuti. But now he's talking about when the jiva's consciousness of his existence disappears. So that's not demigod worship. Nothing can be understood. In that state, there's no light at all. That is called darkness. Those who engage in sambhuti or material existence are even further from realizing Atma and enter worse darkness. So he's saying in that state, there's no light at all, and they are absorbed in material existence. He's not exactly saying that they are, trying to enjoy matter, but it's material existence because there's no spirituality there. So what apparently seemed like a contradiction, if understood in this way, is not a contradiction. Because Bhaktivinoda Thakur is not speaking about demigod worship or the worship of matter. What he's speaking about is sort of the nihilism of certain philosophies, which say that there's no consciousness. Essentially, nirvana or perfection is the lack of any existence at all. Mayavadis say that there's only one existence. We all merge. But Buddhists say there's no existence at all. So he's understanding this verse as speaking about these two things and comparing these two things. And both could be correct. You see, the way Krishna spoke in Isopanisad and the way it's written, it could refer to both. It could be referring to demigods in relation to Mayavad, impersonal understanding. And it could also be meaning Mayavad philosophy in relation to nihilism. Okay, so now let's go back to this point of materialism versus pseudo-religion. A theme that has been a theme of the Isopanisad. Materialism is bad. Pseudo-religion is worse. A wolf is dangerous. You know, a lion, a wolf, is important to be far away from them because they are dangerous. But a wolf dressed like a sheep is even more dangerous, because it's the same material mentality of wanting to enjoy, of wanting to be the controller, but it's covered, it's camouflaged in spirituality. And this is the mistake of the impersonalists. They want to be controller, they want to lord it over material nature, but they want to do it in the name of spirituality. Why? Because they want to be God. And you'll see the impersonalists, they refer to each other like this. They'll say, you're God, I'm God. They will refer to each other as Narayan. They will say, how are you Narayan? They'll actually do that because they believe that everything is one and they're self-realized, so they've understood that oneness, so they have become that one. And when you understand your oneness with that one, then you become God. And Prabhupada says God must always be God. God can never come under illusion. God can never get a toothache. If he can, then he's not God. If at any point God can be under illusion, then that's not God. And even they recognize that they were under illusion, and now as a result of their jnana, they've become self-realized. But if they were under illusion, then they must be individual souls, separate from the Lord. Also connected, but they must be individual souls. So this is the contrast between demigod worship or impersonalism and Krishna bhakti. Why is demigod worship and impersonalism on one side and Krishna bhakti on the other side? The difference is surrender versus speculation. The bhakta surrenders to the Lord. To fully understand Krishna, one has to surrender. Otherwise, through negation, one will have an incomplete idea of the absolute truth. This should be through, not though. Through negation, one will have an incomplete. The impersonalist is simply negating the material world. He's saying God is not this. He's something else. And the impersonalist is correct in their understanding. God is not this. But they don't know what he is, and therefore it is an incomplete idea. They don't know about his rupa and his lila and the transcendental nature of these things. That can only be relieved, janma karma chame divyam. Those who have surrendered to Krishna, they can understand. What is the difference between the demigods worship and Krishna bhakti? That is the difference between temporary versus permanent. Demigod worship and impersonal realization give limited and temporary benefits, whereas Krishna bhakti gives eternal benefits. The difference is material versus spiritual. The planets of the demigods are all within the material world, and therefore subject to the miseries and problems of material existence. Right? So the demigods, they're all subject to, birth, disease, old age, death. Indra dies, Indra's born, Indra gets old, Indra gets eyes all over his body. He has problems. But in Krishna's abode, there are no problems. It never ends. It's eternal. There's no pain, no suffering, no hatred, no envy, no greed. The differences between cheating and truth. Impersonalists who claim to be avatars and concoct philosophy create a society of cheaters and cheated. However, governments are no longer strong enough to stop this. So they give false philosophies to people. Yet the leaders cannot stop these false philosophers. And the basic false philosophy they give is that they claim to be an avatar, when in fact they are, a cheater. They're cheating people and they're saying, I'm God. Whereas Krishna Bhakti is giving the truth. It's not cheating, it's giving the truth. Krishna says in the Gita, to a cheater I come as the ultimate cheat. I cheat the cheaters. With those who want real knowledge, I reveal myself to them. Real knowledge and detachment, these can only arise from devotional service to Lord Krishna. Impersonalists try to make a show of devotional service through philanthropic work, but they don't actually come up to the standard. They disobey so many important injunctions, like surrendering to a bona fide spiritual master. They sometimes claim to be ex-disciples of some other bogus person. So they are making a show, but they are not actually following a genuine spiritual practice. They're not actually following, they're not actually trying to be genuine spiritual practitioners. And quite unfortunately, even in the path of devotion, in the path of bhakti, not in the path exactly, but in the society of devotees, we also find devotees like this, who are more interested in making a show, and we ourselves are like this. We should reflect that we are more interested in wanting to have position, power, lord it over, be called a great personality, have a big title, but we're not actually interested in Krishna consciousness for the reason why it exists. We're not actually interested in Krishna consciousness. We're not interested in being Krishna conscious of Krishna all the time. Everything else we're conscious of. What's the politics? What's the latest, gossip in the temple? What's the latest, power struggle or problem in the temple? But we are least interested in actually taking advantage of the real nectar, which is love of Krishna, which is chanting, which is hearing, which is, preaching. That's not interesting to us. All the problems are interesting, but the bliss is not interesting. And that's the end of mantra 12. Okay, so this was exceptionally technical, this verse, because we looked at the different interpretations of the different acharyas, but the theme was very simple. I'll stop here and see if there are any comments or questions or anything anyone needs clarification on. Please don't be shy. Yashoda Vatsala Prabhu, yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Thank you so much, and it was a really difficult verse, and that too, I felt like it was becoming difficult when we read through the multiple interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
But then later, thanks for simplifying it, and then giving Srila Prabhupada's details on it. And I was just also thinking like, between Sambhuti and Sambhuti, it's, I think for me, Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur translation, it touched me more because I always feel like, Asambhava is something like, that is not possible or not existent. Sambhava is something that is possible or existent. And some people go ahead with understanding, like, they say, oh, Manav Seva is Madhav Seva. I will just serve these, bodies, and I will serve these people around, but, I don't believe in God. So that kind of understanding, I felt like it's kind of a sambhuti where I'm just going with the material things, and, at the body level, while other people who are actually impersonalist, what Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur says is like, yeah, basically, I understood here. Please correct me. So I understood, like, that I cannot be God, but I'm part and parcel of the God. So I have to keep that particular understanding, and I cannot be happy alone also. Even if I go to God and be there alone with Him, I won't be happy, because I definitely need something more there as well. And thank you for giving that, mentioning that multiple dimensions of from the perspective of people who are seeing from different views. And I remembered, His Grace S.B. Keshav Swami Maharaj. I was listening to him a couple of days ago, and he said, how you see it differs, because he was giving one example, like birds of same feather flock together. It sees like, okay, the similar things, go together, but at the same time, then he gave another example that opposite poles attract. Both are true, but through different dimension of the way we are seeing it. So it was so wonderful. Thank you for giving all this explanation. It's making it clear. I'm still not there, but yeah, definitely it's making it clear. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful comment. Yes, and we will find this very often, that the acharyas explain things in different ways, and we sometimes become bewildered by it. But there's nothing to be bewildered, because Krishna is like a gem, and the same gem will appear in different ways. And the Shastras are like this as well, that the same verse can be understood in different ways, and both ways are correct. And that's intentional, because Krishna likes to speak in a way that has many different meanings. The Upanishads actually say this, that Krishna speaks in a bewildering way. Yes, Hare Krishna, Mataji.
I have a question, Prabhu.
Yes.
Sorry,
Please.
could not raise my hand. I don't know if somebody else was asking a question. Hare
No,
Krishna.
you weren't. No, go ahead.
Okay. So, thank you, Prabhu. This was, like you said, very technical. But it's just wonderful to see the way every acharya has interpreted it. I just wanted to run this by you to see if my understanding is correct. If you step back completely and think about what Madhavacharya has said, that whether you worship as the Lord as the destroyer of misery and ignorance, or as only the creator of bliss and knowledge, in both situations, one is bad, one is worse. And then Baladev Acharya says, whether you worship the manifest Brahma or unmanifest Prakriti, it's again a bad or worse situation. So, and then the third one, whether with the Bhakti Vinod Thakur, whether it's the impersonal, but worshipping the impersonal or worshipping the matter.
Yes.
Everyone is giving a contrast and saying that either or is not right. If you worship one of the contrasting sides. So is this the way to think about it, that we need to understand both aspects, but at the end, worship the eternal, spiritual, absolute truth?
You put it actually very nicely, very succinctly, and you've understood the essence. Because one time, Ravindra Sarup Prabhu, he was a scholar, he was a PhD, and he went to Srila Prabhupada, and he said that I would like to dedicate my life to refuting impersonalism and to proving to the world, to arguing to the world that God is a person. So he wrote this letter to Srila Prabhupada, and he was feeling that Prabhupada will be so happy, because one of Prabhupada's purpose in coming was to fight against impersonalism and establish Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. So he wrote this letter, and Srila Prabhupada responded to him by saying, this is very good, this is very nice, but always remember that Krishna is both personal and impersonal.
Correct.
So true knowledge, real knowledge, is understanding something in its wholeness. So if we understand Krishna, like the impersonalists, the mistake they make that God is transcendental, he is Brahman. And they say this world is mithya. Brahma satyam, jagan mithya. Their understanding of God being Brahman is correct, but their understanding of the world being mithya is incorrect. Because then you are limiting God. You're saying that God is not the source of this world. If God is the source of this world, how can this world be mithya, or false, or illusion, or unreal? How can it be unreal? Mithya means completely unreal, false. It is real. We have misunderstood it, and that is the falsity, that we have misunderstood the actual situation. Our misconception is the problem. But the world itself is God's energy. Prakriti is Krishna's energy. So real knowledge means to understand things in their fullness. And if we understand things halfway, then as they say, half knowledge is dangerous. Little knowledge is dangerous. So being in ignorance is good, is not good. But having little knowledge is even more dangerous. And that's the essence here. That's the idea here. The devotee is actually understanding things in their wholeness. He understands the position of the demigods. They're not to be neglected, they're not to be disrespected, they are to be respected, but as servants of the Lord. He understands the position of the impersonal Brahman. It is the effulgence of the Lord, the energy of the Lord. And he understands the position, the ultimate position of the Supreme Lord as a source of both the effulgence and the demigods. And therefore he engages in serving the Lord, the complete whole. He engages in worshipping the personal aspect of Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. I was thinking, okay, Lakshmi Kandalai Prabhu, or Mataji, sorry.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Very intense class, and I feel I have so much to learn, and I'm just a little more confused. Prabhuji, I wanted to ask, but a lot of these other philosophies, they actually quote Bhagavad Gita shlokas, they read Bhagavatam, they read, Mahabharatam, and they quote a lot of them, but so I find that confusing, like how they not see Krishna as the ultimate, but yet, like I'm finding confusion in that.
Yes. Yeah, and I actually need to refer, I have it in my notes, but actually refer to, I don't remember the exact reference of it, refer to where the reference was. But it's actually said that Krishna, when he speaks in elusive ways. And this is in the Bhagavatam, where Bhishma Dev is lying on the bed of arrows. And Bhishma Dev is asking, the Pandavas are asking, what is the cause of this battle of Kurukshetra and the suffering of the Pandavas? And in the commentary, the Acharyas say that Krishna will not speak directly. He will not tell them directly. Because this is one of the qualities of Krishna, that he likes to speak in bewildering or elusive ways. Why? Because this is why this knowledge is so confidential. Prabhupada says this in the Gita. He says that Krishna says this is the most confidential knowledge. And everyone has a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. So how is this the most confidential knowledge? If everyone has access to it, it's on there on Google, google.com, Bhagavad Gita, it's right there. Then in what ways is it confidential? It's confidential because even though we'll have the book in front of us, even though we have the verses, only a devotee can understand the true meaning. And Krishna intentionally likes to speak in this way so that only his devotees can understand the meaning and they can explain it to others. And people can only understand what he's saying through the words of his devotee. So how does Krishna speak in elusive ways? Well, Sanskrit is a language like this, right? We were talking about asambhuti and sambhuti. Now this can refer to many things. Even our acharyas are saying that it can refer to different things. So the impersonalists will read this and they will interpret it in their impersonal way. And they'll say, oh, those who worship the personal form of God are nescients. Still more are those who worship the demigods. And they'll give some interpretation on the word sambhuti and asambhuti that fits that category. So similarly, they'll read the Bhagavad Gita, and where Krishna says, Mam Ekam Sharanam Raja, they'll say, oh, the Ekam that he's referring to, Mam Ekam, is the oneness of Brahman. Worship the oneness of Brahman. And don't worship the Krishna standing there, but worship the one behind him. This is actually an interpretation of the Gita. Krishna is clearly saying, Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Raja. Give up all varieties of religion, just surrender unto me alone. They say, oh, that alone means actually, even though he said the word Mam there, what actually he's trying to say is that worship the oneness behind him. Therefore, the word Ekam is there. So the way the impersonalists interpret Shastra is they accept and understand the indirect meaning. So when a verse is there, it has a direct meaning and an indirect meaning. They will expand on the indirect meaning of the verse. A verse is there, they don't translate it directly, in its obvious way, like a 5-year-old would understand an English sentence. They don't do that. They take that sentence, that Sanskrit word, and they find a secondary meaning, and they accept that because they say, oh, that's the true meaning. The obvious meaning is not the actual meaning. And it's an art of interpretation. The actual meaning is not the real one. That is to misguide people. But the real meaning is the one that I'm telling you. And the Vaishnavacharyas, they take the actual obvious meaning. Another mistake that the impersonalists do is, in the Bhagavatam, you'll find some verses that are referring to and glorifying the personal aspect of Krishna. Majority of the verses. There are some verses that talk about and glorify the impersonal aspect of Krishna. So both verses are there, and I can actually show you verses in the Bhagavatam where it's saying that the ultimate truth is Brahman, impersonal. You should worship that impersonal Brahman, and you think, oh, Bhagavatam is a Mayavadi text. So there's verses like that. But if you look at the Bhagavatam as a whole, which is what people normally do, is they read the whole book, or at least the whole chapter, or at least the whole section, you'll see that Bhagavatam is glorifying both the personal aspect. In fact, as I mentioned, the majority of the verses are establishing that Krishna's personal aspect is the highest. And only a few verses are glorifying the impersonal aspect. So the devotee will see both and say, oh, therefore Krishna is both personal and impersonal. Both aspects are being glorified, Krishna is both, like Prabhupada was telling. But the impersonalists, what do? They say, see, both verses are there, and the real verses, the verses that are of utmost importance, that are giving the true knowledge, are the impersonal verses. And the personal verses are just there to give us the the external knowledge. So they take Shastra and they divide it into what is the ultimate truth and what is the secondary truth. And so just ignore these verses. And this is exactly what they do. Shankaracharya says this verse is actually not telling the essence. It is giving conventional knowledge that God is a person. But the real knowledge, the real knowledge, because Krishna didn't have a good interpreter, I'm interpreting. The real knowledge is that behind all of this, Krishna is impersonal. And so in the whole Bhagavatam, they'll only talk about 5 verses, whereas the devotee will talk about all 18,000 verses, including the impersonal verses, because we have no problem accepting the impersonal aspect of Krishna. So this is their strategy in interpretation. And Krishna allows this because some people want to be misguided. Some people are not perfectly sincere, so he gives a philosophy that satisfies them. And this is why he speaks in elusive language. because he's giving something for everyone. And if someone wants the real thing, then they have to take it from the devotee. They have to get the real thing. But if someone doesn't want the real thing, then they don't have to. They can misguide themselves. So good question.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, can you please repeat Srila Prabhupada's response? That one line that you mentioned, it really, I think
His response to Ravindra Sarup Prabhu?
Yes.
His response to him was that God is both. It's very good that you are doing this work of establishing God's personality. But remember that God is both personal and impersonal. Yes. Because the reason he was training him, Ravindra Sarup Prabhu said, Prabhupada was training me because if Ravindra Sarup Prabhu would have gone and argued with people saying, God is a person, he would not have won the argument because God is both. The impersonalists are only looking at half. And this is what the Isopanisad here is teaching us. The same message, Prabhupada basically repeated it to Ravindra Sarup Prabhu. Same message is being told, that see both. All aspects are important to see. Like our whole philosophy is about both. Like this story of Sudama Brahman. We were just discussing this yesterday. When Krishna is in the school of Sandipani Muni, and he's his student, he's serving his spiritual master. Then at one point, Krishna and Sudama have gone to the forest to collect wood. And when they go to the forest, there's a big thunderstorm. And in that thunderstorm, it's a very heavy thunderstorm. Sudama is getting very scared because he's not Krishna, he's a living entity, so he gets scared. And their guru has given them the instruction of collecting sticks, bringing back firewood. So that also Krishna has to fulfill. He's the perfect disciple. So it's described that in one hand, Krishna takes the bundle of sticks tucked in his hand. And in the other hand, he holds the hand of Sudama. And this has a great significance. The message that he is giving is that we must do both. We must follow the instruction of the spiritual master. That's the bundle of the sticks. But that's not enough. We also have to make friendship with the devotees. And that's holding the hand of Sudama. So both things must be there. Either or will not work, right? And then that's complete knowledge. We must have, relationship with devotees, appreciate every devotee. And then, but not just relationship that we're having fun, every night is a party, I'll make pizza prasadam for you, you make pizza prasadam for me, I'll make cheesecake for you, you make cheesecake for me. No, along with that relationship, then that relationship is there for service. Then we have to serve the spiritual master also. But it's also not that we're serving the spiritual master, but then we don't like any of the devotees. We're not working with them. We have to do both. That is perfection. So Prabhupada here, right, in this last one we're reading, that surrender, real surrender means surrendering to the spiritual master, serving Krishna, recognizing his personality, recognizing the complete nature of Krishna as a source of both the material and spiritual worlds, and therefore engaging everything material in Krishna's service. So we have the best philosophy, the most complete, the whole philosophy. Okay, so I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your very kind attention. Next time we'll do text 13. Hopefully we can do 13 and 14, 2 verses next time, and finish this section. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.